Perfect. I think we should be live now. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction as we're all joining. I hope everyone's having a lovely morning. Please feel free to drop a hello in the chat if you can hear us. And if you can see us okay, I just want to test out all the microphones and the cameras. Good morning, James. Morning, David. Here we go. Morning, Andrew. So we'll just start in a few minutes just so give everybody a chance to join in, but we'll probably start in the next minute or two. So just sit tight in the meantime. Lovely. Hope everyone's been having a really good morning wherever you are. Hopefully we have a few people joining us from on the eastern side, eastern states, and hopefully a couple of people joining in at 9 a.m. in Western Australia as well, if they've made the effort. Lovely. Morning, Ashley. Good morning, Chris. Lovely to see you all here. I'm glad that you can hear us all okay. We've had a bit of construction in the building recently, so apologies if you hear that throughout the webinar. We've told them to stop, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But it seems like everyone can hear us, which is great. Okay. Alrighty. Still got a couple more people joining in, so we'll just sit tight for another minute and then I think we'll be good to go. It's good to see some familiar faces though and some familiar names at the webinar, so thanks to everyone that's come back. It's been a while since we've had our last episode. I can't speak for everyone here, but I know it's been a busy 2022 for everyone, so it's nice to be back and nice to be presenting on the webinar again.
Yeah, good.
All right. Perfect. All right, well, we're going to let the stragglers join in as they wish, but I think we're going to get started now because all of you have joined in now and it's a couple minutes past 11. So good morning. I want to say thank you for joining us here today at episode 4 of our Think Brick Australia architectural webinar series. We're now up to episode 4, and today we're going to be talking about creating texture and depth with bricks and how we might use clay masonry and associated products to add a little bit more visual flair and a bit more visual interest to our buildings. And today to do that, obviously, some of you who might have joined before might recognise me. I'm Jack, I'm one of our engineers here at Think Brick Australia. And today I'm joined by Callista, one of our other engineers here at Think Brick Australia.
Yeah, thanks guys. I hope you learned something good today.
Yeah, so look, just a bit of housekeeping before I dive into everything. With the Demio platform, if you want to enlarge the slides so that you can see them in a little bit more detail, you can actually pop out the chat, so it'll pop out in a new window, and that actually enlarges the screen. So feel free to do that if you want to see the slides in more detail. The other thing is once we sort of get past the introductory slides, what I'll do is I'll actually hide our camera so that the slides actually get larger even further. So if you're having any issues viewing the slides, that might be a way to help you there. But after this webinar, a recording will be available for everyone as well. And so if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout the course of today's webinar. We might not get to them straight away. I've got the chat on the laptop here. But we'll definitely answer all of them at some point during the webinar. So please feel free to drop all of that. If you have any questions or if you have any information, please feel free to drop it in. So look, I just want to quickly take the time to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which all of our attendees are joining us today from across Australia, which is really great to see. And I want to pay my respects to elders in all of those locations and areas and on those traditional lands, past, present, and emerging. So look, for those of you who don't know who Think Brick Australia are, and for those of you who don't know what our mission is and our vision, we essentially want to make it easier to build in brick, block, and pavers. And we want to do that by facilitating important conversations and talking with engineers and architects like yourselves to actually gain a better understanding of where bricks are in Australia, where we're using them, how we're using them, and how we could be doing something different and how we could be developing the use of bricks to really, elevate the use of contemporary Australian design. And that's really where this architectural series was born out of. It was sort of born out of a vision to, really work with architects and understand how bricks are making their way into our Think Brick Awards and into Australian design, and how we can sort of be projecting those ideas to more and more people so that they can see how bricks are being used. And look, just to sort of extend on that before, a few of you might have already seen a similar slide if you've joined our webinars previously. But look, this is our key strategy. If any of you here today have joined and you haven't heard of our Think Brick Awards, that would be the first thing I would encourage you all to check out. Our awards this year have closed and have been judged now, and we will be announcing our winners in August. So please keep an eye out on all of our social media for further updates on our Think Brick Awards. And you can sort of see here the other sort of engagements we do, both with engineers, researchers, as well as our members. And, what this all boils down to is that we want to make it easier to build in brick, and we want to make it easier to be comfortable using brick. And that's why on our website, we publish free resources. So if you're an architect and you're looking to use brick for a new design, and you're looking to do something a bit different that you might not have done before, or that you might have seen in one of these webinars, or you might have seen in our Think Brick Awards, our sort of research papers, case studies, and fact sheets are all there to sort of assist you with ensuring that you can design that brick project the way you want. And again, I'd just like to remind you all, if you haven't listened to our Think Brick podcast, I encourage you to all do so now. This is a really great follow-up and a great complement to these webinars. It's a really great way to get a tidbit of information in a digestible manner and sort of see how famous Australian architects and previous Think Brick Award winners have approached their designs and gone from the actual design concept process all the way through to the construction and finished product. And I mentioned before, we represent our members, so I'd like to take the opportunity here to sort of showcase who we represent here and the great companies that assist architects with regards to masonry design. And I'm sure we've got a couple of them joining us here today at the webinar, so thank you all for joining. But you can see here we have for Think Brick our national members, PGH Bricks and Pavers and Austral Bricks, as well as our state members, Midland Brick. And then you can see further down we have our regional and associate members. And all of these companies are fantastic, and they do a great job at ensuring that the use of brick is elevated in contemporary Australian design. So if you're looking for a supplier, if you're looking for someone to work with on your next brick project, I definitely encourage you all to check out these companies. They're absolutely fantastic. I think the same can be said for all of our associations, even with the CMAA and the Roof Tile Association. There's a fantastic lot of members with Adbri Masonry and Austral Masonry as well, and Bristol Roofing with each of our associations. So to anyone here that's from our members, feel free to give yourselves a shout out in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. And feel free to put your name out there for any of the architects listening today. So what did you get out of this series and out of today's episode? Look, we really want you to get a better understanding of the types of masonry units that are available with all of our member manufacturers, the type of bricks they produce and where these units can and how they can be used. And we want to give you a wider knowledge of the sort of different ways you can articulate your masonry and the different ways you can treat your masonry to add that visual interest to your home. And on top of that, we want you to be inspired. We want you to come away from this webinar with some really great ideas that you can approach with your next projects. And most importantly, as I've mentioned a few times already, if you have any questions, whether they're technical or whether you want to know more about any of the projects we talk about today, or any brick projects in general, please feel free to ask us in the chat, or feel free to email us at either of the emails below or at info@thinkbrick.com.au. Really, we love getting your questions, and we love trying to take a stab at answering them and see how we can help you out. So this series is founded on all of your feedback and all of your questions. So I really encourage you all to go forward and ask questions throughout today's content. So look, this is today's content. So I'm actually going to palm it off to Callista now, and she's going to take you through the first little bit of the webinar, and then you're going to see me again towards the end. So I'm going to turn off I'll let Callista introduce herself, and then I'll turn off our camera.
Thanks, Jack, for that great introduction. As Jack said before, I'm Callista. I'm one of the engineers on the team. And so what we'll be going through today with the architectural webinar, just kind of jumping off what Jack said before in terms of our series aims. So we really would like to kind of heighten and inspire architectural contemporary Australian design. And so the first thing that we can kind of have a look at with the contents is actually creating visual interest. So how do we do that with the treatment of brick and clay masonry? We'll be then looking at brick units, that is the colour, shape and face styles, mortar with the colour and the joints, detailing, curved walls and corbelling. And these will all be done in conjunction with these case studies down below. And see, these are actually all from our Think Brick Award series as well. So we have the Tate House by Sarah Stripley, PRAWN by WOWOWA Architecture, West End by Turner Studio and Heller House by Ulf Architecture. As you can see in this image here, we have a stock standard red brick home in a nondescript location. But the real question that we want to ask today is, how can we achieve greater visual interest when building with bricks? Well, the first component we can consider changing is the brick color of the units, the color of the brick units and mortar. However, keep in mind there are still some really great red clay brick projects out there. The next thing we can consider is the detailing of the building itself, adding more ornamentation to the openings and in an intentional way. And of course, looking at the structure of the masonry system itself. So all these factors combined can actually achieve great depth. And with that, we get these great and excellent results, as you can see here. So bricks aren't necessarily the first material most architects would reach for. The treatment of these designs can actually create projects that are both delicate as well as substantial too. And the first thing that we'll be talking about here is the use of brick colors. So brick colors are a very simple way to create and design and pull off different looks that create actual depth and different textures. I think that's actually quite exemplified by the first little example we have here, the Echuca Twin Rivers School by Neela Design Architects. Now this project actually uses Barrel Blue and Austral bricks from the La Paloma series. And what it actually was inspired by was this, on the right you can see the endangered species called the Plains Wanderer. So that was actually the wall on the left side. The textured wall here was inspired by the plumage of the bird. So we can see that this is an example of creating texture and depth as well as meaning behind intentional designs, especially for a school as well. And lastly, of course, we have the Hale Junior School underneath. And so we can see that brick colors in general, the individual units can be used as both a statement piece, but they can also be used in conjunction, so blending them and also contrasting them too. And of course, we have brick unit shapes. So we actually referenced this in one of our earlier episodes too, in episode 1. We actually have the Koala Childcare North Campus here. And so these have actually used the single bull-nosed bricks from Austral Bricks. And it's a really great design, as you can see. But it's not only limited to this. So imagine building with a camp brick instead of a single bull-nose as well. And of course, we have brick face styles. So not only can we create texture as a whole for the masonry unit systems, but we can also create them through the individual units themselves. So we can see that we actually have many different textures here. And my favorite in particular is actually the rolled bricks because of the little, I guess, more organic feel. And of course, mortar color. So not only can brick unit colors actually elevate your design in contemporary architecture as well, but also mortar color too. So on the right here, we can see that the West End by Turner Studios actually has the testing prototype here. So you can see the contrast in terms of, so that is a darker color of mortar with a darker color of brick. And so that creates kind of a more seamless effect. But this is kind of juxtaposed to, I guess, Kirsten Thompson's Northcote High School Performing Arts Centre. So this project actually used two different bricks. On the left, you can kind of see the red brick, and on the right, you can kind of see the glazed sort of face style brick here, which is a darker color. But the lighter masonry as well just adds a little bit more contrast and visual interest to the building itself. And the resulting effects, as you can see here, is quite different in terms of the effects that you can pull off and achieve with brick. So again, we have the darker color of the mortar that actually helps to blend in with the darker color of the brick. And then on the right, and then on the left-hand side, we actually have that kind of traditional red clay brick sort of feel with a lighter mortar color. And again, this is actually a great example of building with traditional red brick. And of course, with the mortar joint, so not only is color a consideration for bricks and mortar, but you can actually have different sort of joints as well, as you guys are probably most aware of. Then there's also a practicality aspect to it as well, I guess, in terms of a raked brick is a little bit more difficult to, I guess, for waterproofing systems in general, but it actually is a great look in terms of it makes the brick look a bit more inset into the masonry walling system itself. And the iron sort of looks as well, and they're really great for like kind of rainwater runoff. Yeah. And this is kind of the achieved effect. And this is actually the tape by Sarah Stribley, which we'll be talking about more. But as you can see here, it actually creates such a really lovely effect with the little shadows as well that you can only really see up close. So that also, again, helps to kind of create more interaction and dialect with the people surrounding. Yeah. And so this is also another effect here. So we can see that this is another prototype by the West End project, which is the Turner Studios. And so you can really see the difference between the raked versus iron joint. I like to think of this as a great example in terms of, you can see the raked how that sort of inlaid inset effect that creates a little bit more depth, whereas the ironed joint actually creates a little bit more of a, again, like that seamless sort of one unit piece. And so now we'll be delving into achieving texture with these case studies. So we have Tate House, Sarah Stribley, Tiger Prawn, WOWOWA, West End, Turner Studio, and Hello House by Wolf Architecture. All of these projects are really great examples of contemporary Australian architecture, as Jack mentioned, that is really elevated by brick use and actually really demonstrates the amount of creativity and the potential that can actually be done with masonry units. Okay, so beginning with Tate by Sarah Stribley. So Tate is actually located in Melbourne and is actually a series of 8 family dwellings. So these are actually reminiscent of traditional townhouses in their vertical massing, but I actually think they're quite they kind of subvert this traditional idea of townhouses as well, because they're quite modern, obviously, in their facade design. As well as that, they use, you know, stereotypical, I guess, uses of brick in townhouses, but it also is subverted by the fact that it actually looks like one cohesive unit with the dimensions of the doors and the windows actually sunken into the building itself. So features of the Tate House that actually create this texture and this depth. So the masonry units are actually these lovely low-house Roman handmade bricks, and they're quite a nice sand-like colour. And the light colour actually helps to kind of bring a little bit more light and brightness to the actual setting itself. And the mortar colour as well, how we were talking about, I guess, with the West End project, the Turner Studio, how it creates that sort of seamless look. I think this is particularly emphasised by Tate itself. So they chose a very nice sort of subtle mortar colour that kind of blends in with the bricks itself and helps to create that sort of cohesive single piece of facade. And the cavity walls itself, just structurally speaking, so there were special wall ties implemented for this project to accommodate the wide cavity walls. And also, again, looking at the different detailing of the building itself, so the soffits and the lintels. So these soffits actually help to provide such a seamless transition between the windows and external walls. And those lintels as well, they additionally help to frame the doors as well and kind of articulate the specific spaces on the facade design itself. And I actually thought that the roof design was a particularly very interesting point about Tate, itself. You don't see a lot of, I guess, bricks incorporated into the roof itself. So these are actually brick faces, and it was a really great way of kind of transitioning between the wall and the roof with the main facade. And so it's not something that's, yeah, again, often really seen. And again, this is an example of how solid masonry can enhance and articulate landscape. I think this particular picture in general actually really helps to kind of capture how bricks are normally seen as a very substantial, very solid type of material, but used in an appropriate way for a setting, in terms of the design, the color, the mortar use as well. It can really create such a lovely and open space too. Okay, so jumping into the details in terms of detailing, so in terms of the walls and the windows, a really great aspect of the Sarah Stribley Tate House is that these soffits and these lintels as well really help to create that sunken in feature that I was talking about before in terms of that depth. So the copper door has been retreated on the main door frame. And so this incorporation of the brick soffit above just really helps to create this depth and in turn these shadows. So it's this idea of negative space and creating all of those different contrasting depths of just light and shadows as well, which actually Jack will probably touch on later as well in some of our projects. And then also, again, kind of just looking at the practical side of building with masonry too, and how that can actually be integrated into the facade itself. So you can actually kind of see here, it's actually quite a subtle look. And it's not necessarily something that you'd see first off if you're at first glance, if you're looking at the Tate buildings themselves. So we have those little weep holes, which I'm sure everyone's kind of has an idea of in terms of the fact that it's a practical application of just being able to drain that moisture from the cavity and preventing water from actually entering the interior of the house itself. And of course, we have these control joints, and these just help to articulate the brickwork. And you can kind of see that they're actually in line with the windows as well. And I actually haven't highlighted them on the slide as well, but you can kind of see them on the right side. But it just goes to show how well the mortar and the brick units have actually been constructed and designed so that it's such a seamless appearance too. And lastly, of course, we have these drain pipes. And so these are a great way in terms of incorporating a pathway for moisture to exit the cavity. We'll actually touch a little bit about that in terms of when we look at the roof as well, at the gutters. Okay, so just a little brief overview in terms of what soffits and lintels are in case anyone's a little confused about the difference. So the soffit in general is actually the section under the overhang of the structure, and it's a frame edge support. Lintels, on the other hand, are mainly above windows, so they actually help to provide strength and support to the masonry courses above. So in case those bricks are actually quite dense and heavy, they actually provide a little bit more structure for that. So brick lintels are actually a feature that can assist in creating these seamless textures. And the Tate is actually a great example of this. So we can kind of see a little bit of the behind the scenes construction work of the Tate itself, so with the structural considerations. So we can see here that from the pictures here that the steel rafters have been placed under timber joists. So these timber joists are actually for the structure of the floor. And kind of just going into, I guess, the mechanism and the design considerations behind the structural support of the actual building itself for lintels and soffits, is that unreinforced masonry over openings in terms of the bearings should be supported by these lintels or these frames. And so the lintel bearings, which is on either side that actually touches the brick courses underneath, should be a minimum of 100 meters for an opening less than 1,000 meters wide, or 150 millimeters for openings over 1,000 millimeters wide. And again, we just have a little few things here in terms of the detailing. So deflection should be the lesser of the span of 360 or 10 millimeters. And then we also have that minimum of 10 millimeters as well. Yeah. And then again, we also have a closer look at the construction of the soffits. So you can actually really see here the steel, which I was talking about before, and the timber joists and how they kind of work in conjunction. So I think we're not too sure exactly how the bricks were adhered to the steel itself, but we do kind of speculate that it could either be tied to it, or it could actually be adhered to it with some sort of glue or mortar itself. And I'll kind of pass it over to Jack if he wants to speak a little bit about this.
Yeah, so look, Callista mentioned before, if we're talking about soffits and if we're talking about how we have inlaid soffits with bricks visible from below. So you can see here, and similar with the tape project, that both of these projects here have these openings and these soffits where they've actually chosen to expose the bricks from below, which is something that we don't see too often, and it's something that can be a little bit difficult to achieve. As Callista mentioned, the traditional way of detailing a soffit or an opening is to use that lintel, whether it's a steel or a concrete lintel, which makes it really easy to then lay your masonry courses over the top of it. What the architects have actually done with the home apartments, this project that you can see on screen here, is they've actually worked really closely with the engineers, and they've worked really closely with Ancon Leviat, who are one of Think Brick Australia's associate members and regional members. And what they've actually done, if you have a look at the photo in the top left, is they've actually developed a shelf angle system as their lintel system to support the brickwork over these soffits. So essentially, the next course of bricks for the next floor actually sits on this shelf angle. And what they've done below that is they've actually employed a bespoke soffit support system. And if you have a look at that top middle image, I think this is a fantastic image as an engineer to show some creative solutions from an engineering standpoint. And what they've actually done is they've used steel rods and threaded it through the cores of the bricks, almost like a macaroni necklace, which is sort of the way that I like to think about it. But again, it's a fantastic example of how we can actually think outside the square with masonry and kind of, detail our masonry in a way that, you might not think it's so different. You might not think it's something you haven't seen before until you spend a minute or so looking at it. And I know that with these soffits, both in the home apartments and the tape project, the more and more you look at those exposed brick soffits from underneath, you sort of understand how much they add to the build and how they make it more monolithic. I'm just also going to take this opportunity to apologise if anyone can hear the construction in the background. I'm trying to raise my voice a little bit, so apologies if you can still hear it, but we're going to progress onwards nonetheless. And look, at this point in time as well, I'd like to say thank you, Chris, in the chat. Chris is one of the people that works for Blockade, one of our associate members with the Concrete Masonry Association. And look, I've talked a little bit about Ancon and some of the clever solutions that the architects used for this project with some of the Ancon shelf angles. And I know that Blockade does some fantastic work with reinforced masonry. So if you ever have any questions or have any issues and you're looking for an engineering solution, Chris really knows his stuff and his team are really great to work with. And who knows, this might be the next project. If you work alongside him, it might be the next project we talk about in our webinars. So look, I'm going to move on to the detailing of the roof for the tape project now that we've talked a little bit about the soffits. And so you can actually sort of see here how the roof has actually come together and some of the techniques that the architects as well as the builders have employed to actually get it done. So you can actually sort of see that the roof was constructed of a stud wall frame. And what they've actually done is they've used brick slips or brick faces on those stud walls to actually give the appearance of a full brick roof without the added weight. And this serves as a non-load bearing component. So you can see here, this is an example down in the bottom left of a brick face walling system. And this is sort of the type of thing that was actually applied to Tate's roof. And if you're looking to do a similar sort of system, I know that some of our members here at Think Brick Australia actually do have their own brick face systems and brick slip systems. And they're really increasing in popularity. So if you're looking for something similar, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to some of our members here at Think Brick Australia and see what solutions they might actually have for your project. Callista also mentioned before when we were talking about detailing and we're talking about weatherproofing, it's incredibly important with masonry to ensure that it's detailed and weatherproofed properly. You probably know if you've been to any of our webinars before and if you've heard me present, my number one analogy is that bricks are like sponges. Over time, they do absorb water very slowly. But what this means is we need to have a mechanism to divert that water and to be able to ensure that it doesn't impact the structure of our builds. So if you actually have a look at the middle image on the slides right now, this is actually a top-down roof view of the Tate project, and you can actually see that underneath the roof, underneath that stud frame and between the sort of stud frame and the brick slips, they've actually detailed a hidden gutter. And what that actually does is it takes any water that falls on that roof or on that terrace that you can see in those top photos, and it actually diverts that water into that hidden gutter, and it actually then redistributes it either through drain pipes or weep holes out of the brickwork. And if you look at a photo of this completed project, you actually can't see the gutters at all. And that was on purpose. That was detailed within the build. The architects wanted this to look quite monolithic, and they wanted the roof and the walls to blend quite seamlessly. So it's really about, as an architect or as a building designer, if you want to achieve a certain look, if you want to achieve that monolithic feel for your builds, it's about thinking outside the box and saying, how can I do my weatherproofing of a masonry walling system, but still get that seamless look? And you can see here that the architects at Sarah Stribley and the builders and the engineers have all worked really closely to actually get that successful result. So look, now I want to talk a little bit about curved walls and bringing detail, texture, and depth to our builds using textured walls. So you can see here the first image on the left. This is a project called PRAWN by WOWOWA Architecture. Bonus points if you can pronounce that really quickly 10 times in a row. In between that, we have the Smart Design Studio, which is in Sydney, and that was the winner of our Think Brick Awards commercial category last year. And then adjacent to that, we have Phoenix Central Park, which was a project by Durback Block Jaggers and John Wardle Architects. All three of these projects have used bricks from our Think Brick members, and you can see they've used them in very different ways to achieve very, very different looks, and looks that you might not associate bricks to achieve. That's something to think about as I'm going through these next slides. So firstly, let's look at Tiger Prawn. The first thing you'll notice about this project is its name. It's a very striking name, and there is a reason for that if you actually have a look at the actual structure and the shape of the structure of the build. It might remind you or resemble slightly a tiger prawn caught in the wild. So you can actually see that the architects, when they approached this project, it would have been very easy to use an alternate lightweight metal or a curved steel sheeting facade to achieve this look. But the architects really, really wanted to focus on using bricks and using clay masonry to create these sort of intricate curved shapes. And the reason they wanted to do that is they wanted to use curved lintels and curved bricks to help diffuse light into the build. You can sort of see that, particularly with that interior image, you can sort of see how the light is actually coming into those rooms. And so look, let's get down into the sort of nitty-gritty of how it was achieved. And this is a very information-dense slide, but it's a really great way of sort of showing the process in which the architects actually stuck through this build and achieved the look they were going for. So let's start off with curved walls and how we might achieve curved walls with bricks. So obviously, when we're achieving a curve, we need to sort of think about how our masonry units are going to stack up. Obviously, bricks are quite rectilinear, and they, are really great for providing those really linear, straight walls and really flush edges. But if we think about how we reorient the units and how we play around with how we stack the units, we can actually achieve a very different look. So what the architects did here is they actually used a sort of half-height stretcher bond, and they've actually reoriented the units, exposing their face, their header edge. So what they've actually done is they've immediately shortened the span of each of their brick units in that curve. And if you think about that, it allows them to orient the units and twist them a lot tighter and create those really tight curves. The other thing they've done here that's important to think about is when we're talking about the tightness of a curve and we're talking about how quickly it bends around a 90-degree angle, we need to think about the overhang that that's actually going to create with the bricks between each course. So, if you think about stacking those bricks up, if you think about stacking Jenga blocks is kind of the one that I like to think of. If you want to create that tight curve, the course directly above is going to actually overhang ever so slightly over that curve. And what that actually can do, if it's the look you're going for, is it can, create that added tactility and that added sense of texture to your wall. And that's exactly what the architects wanted to do with this. They've actually created that sort of really nice, rough, natural sort of roughness to the wall that really accentuates the idea of a tiger prawn, accentuates the idea of the curvature of this build. And you can sort of see the image down on the bottom right there that sort of shows the site plan. The architects were really, really great at setting out a specific laying plan for their builders and for their engineers so that they knew exactly how each brick course was going to look. So it became really easy to follow almost like instructions of how to actually lay the bricks with the build. And you can actually see these next couple photos show a really great example of how they've actually used different shaped bricks that Callista mentioned earlier to create different dynamic features within the build. So firstly, I would draw your attention to that image on the left, and you can see straight away that not every single one of these bricks that they've used is directly rectilinear. They've actually used split bricks, which are essentially a regular square brick that's had one of the corners chopped off. And what that allowed them to do is create that sort of arrow point shape on their build with relative ease, and it allowed them to construct it with relative ease as well. And it avoided the need for having to cut bricks on site as well. So if you're a designer and you're thinking about how to achieve these tight shapes and how to achieve, different curved and not so linear sections, bricks are a great way to do this because our manufacturers provide bricks in different shapes and they can actually cut them for you and deliver them in the shapes you want. So it saves a lot of time and adds to the efficiency of your build when you get to the job site. Now, I'll draw your attention to the image at the top there, in the top right. And you can see the other thing they've done here. I mentioned they did split the bricks in half and they altered the orientation of which they laid them. And essentially that allowed them to basically double the use of bricks, or like half the use of bricks, I should say, for the build. So you can see, depending on which side of your curved wall you want exposed, you can actually detail your bricks a lot differently. So you can see on the flush exterior side of that curved wall, the architects and the builders have gone to great lengths to ensure that it's detailed very finely and it looks very nice from the outside. But you can see on the inside where they've actually got those rough split bricks exposed, there's no need to actually detail that wall to the same standard because you're not seeing the interior side of that brick wall. So again, if we're thinking about detailing and we're thinking about what part of our masonry is actually going to be exposed, it can save you a lot of time and you can come up with these clever and sustainable and efficient solutions to build your build. And you can see here, we've got some advice on the right-hand side for how we actually might look to use mortar to create our curves. And you can see that we can actually alter and manipulate our mortar to create these tighter curves. It's now at this point I've noticed that Andreas from Lohas has actually entered the chat. So thanks Andreas for all of that information. If anyone does have any additional questions about tape, I know the team at Lohas are really fantastic. They've given us lots of great information, so please feel free to ask them while they're in the chat. And feel free to email us or them in the future as well, because they're absolutely great and they've done some incredible projects before with bricks, but also with roof tiles as well. So look, moving on from curved walls, I now want to quickly talk about corbelling and how we might achieve texture, depth, and visual interest through corbelling our projects. You can see here there's a couple of examples on the screen from our previous years of Think Brick Awards. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with West End. Callista mentioned this project a little bit earlier in the slides, but I'm going to take you through some of the considerations that the architects, designers, engineers, builders, and manufacturers all had to think about to get those beautiful 2 to 3 story arches that you can see in that central image. So you can straight away see here, looking at West End by Turner Studio, you can actually see these fantastic, monolithic, I would say, arches that they've actually employed with the project. The first thing you might notice, apart from the arches, is that everything is quite seamless. They've really made an effort to expose and celebrate the brick in as many locations as possible. And this is kind of on theme with Tate and the other projects we've discussed today. It's really about celebrating how we can use bricks in ways that we might not have thought possible before. So you can straight away see that when it comes to arches, we need to be thinking about ensuring they have sufficient rise to carry the loads and be able to transfer those loads from the top of the arch transversely outward into the brickwork. So realistically, it's about ensuring the arch is self-supporting and can redirect loads that are exerted onto the top of it. And AS 3700, our masonry standard, as well as your engineers, will be able to really ensure that whatever arch you're designing, whether it's a really simple, one-story doorway, all the way up to something like what we've achieved here with West End by Turner Studio, there's really different ways we can achieve this to assist the arch. So what you'll see, I think, in the next photo is you'll sort of see the clever solutions that the engineers and architects, as well as the builders, work together to employ on site to get these arches to work. So you can see they've got this in-plane corbelling for this arch. And what I mean by that is that you've got these bricks basically staircasing upwards in the direction of the brick wall. So every single course, we're protruding that further and further out. And what we've actually done is we've tied that back to an asymmetrical arch. And that arch, that steel frame, does our load bearing for us and actually supports that brickwork and supports that corbel so that it actually doesn't eventually fall under its own weight. And you can see with some of these other pictures on the right-hand side, they've replicated that asymmetrical arch design, not just with those sandstone or those sort of, sandy colored bricks, they've actually done it with those dark colored bricks that Callista mentioned before. So no matter what sort of design, no matter what sort of color and articulation you're looking for, you can think about combining architectural design with those engineering principles to bring about something that's a little bit different and that really strikes and really stands out. And again, I mentioned before, the architects have made a really great effort to celebrate and expose bricks with every single element of the build. And they've had to use these steel structural elements to sort of hide a lot of the structure. And then they've actually overlaid the bricks on top of that to really give the appearance of a flush masonry design. And it's incredibly clever. So if we're talking about corbelling, I've mentioned in-plane corbelling, which is in the direction of the wall. And that's what you can see in that top left image with those bright pink bricks. What we can also do is we can have out-of-plane corbelling. And as the name suggests, it's where we're going to be protruding the bricks out of our brick wall. Now, AS 3700 does set some guidelines for how we might do this. But again, we can work closely as a team between builders, engineers, and designers to really, to celebrate our corbel and add that texture to our brickwork. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hello House by Oof Architecture, which was in our Think Brick Awards a few years ago. And just a little bit of a teaser image there down in the bottom right. You can see they've used some beautiful Chillingham white bricks to really accentuate an image or a pixel art, as I've sort of thought about it before. And they've used corbelling to achieve that effect, and they've done it in a very clever manner. So look, let's quickly start with how and what our restrictions are with corbelling out of plane. And you can see that this slide has a bit of information that's been taken straight from our Australian standard. But what you really need to know and what you really need to take out of this is probably that bottom dot point there. The projection of any single brick shall not exceed 1/3 of the unit dimension measured in the direction of the corbel. So 1/3 of 110 millimeters for a standard brick, which would be 36 millimeters, or half the height of the unit, which if again we're using a traditional 230, 110, 76 brick, would be 38 millimeters. So we take the lesser of those, and what we essentially end up with, and if I want you to take anything out of this slide, it would be this dot point, is that the maximum dimension or the maximum protrusion per course for a corbel would generally be about 35 to 38 millimeters, or 36 if you're using the rules there. But again, we can sort of work closely to adjust that as necessary, depending on the design that we're going for. So some construction considerations to think of to help your builder out is to ensure that if you're tying back to a structural frame, and if you're tying back to corbels that are stepping out from the wall or stepping out in the direction of the plane, make sure you allow for longer wall ties to actually be able to achieve that tie back as the corbel steps away from your frame. Alternatively, your frame itself might actually step out and actually tie back into the bricks as well. And the other thing, if you've got a double brick wall or a cavity brick system, make sure your corbel doesn't breach the cavity, or if it does, make sure you have alternative weatherproofing allowances to ensure that moisture can't cross your cavity. And again, if you are looking for a pattern with your textured wall, with your corbelled wall, the different bond you employ will actually influence the pattern that you get for that brickwork. So you can sort of see here with the Hello House, I've actually got an image, we've got an image here of the project, and we've also got a detailed image here of how they've actually achieved it from a top-down or a plan view. So the first thing I'd like to draw your attention to from a corbelling perspective is that in order to achieve their pattern, they've realistically thought about the brick as a pixel, or one singular unit that they've then manipulated. Myself, I unfortunately come from the generation that's used video games throughout growing up, and computer games, but I sort of liken a lot of brick projects like this to Minecraft and to singular block units. And if we think of bricks as a modular unit that we can manipulate to create different patterns, it opens up a lot of possibilities for us with how we might actually corbel and protrude our bricks. And what the architects at OOF Architecture did here is they actually used the negative space for their corbel, or essentially the bricks that are laid flush in that regular stretcher or Flemish bond, to actually form the pattern of their brickwork. And the corbel itself, the actual pattern where the bricks are protruding outwards, actually basically bold those letters to make it a bit more obvious from street level. So, as Callista mentioned before, we can realistically use colour to create a pattern like this. And we can do so a little bit easier with coloured bricks. But it's nice to be able to do something a little bit different and articulate our masonry a little bit differently. And that's exactly what the architects have done here. And just on a side note, you can see that window in the O. You know, it's just playful and it's a bit fun. And I think it's kind of an exciting use of masonry, particularly going back a few years to when this build was actually completed. But look, straight away, if we're now going into the sort of detailing and engineering design side of things, you can sort of see that with this build, they've actually used the bricks and turned them to protrude outwards. And you can see this is a cavity brick system. And some of those bricks actually do protrude into that cavity that I mentioned before. So what we sort of need to do if we're having bricks in our cavity, if we're protruding them inwards, is we need to make sure there's still somewhat of a gap there between those bricks and that styrofoam board cavity insulation, or ensure that there's some sort of waterproof membrane between those bricks to ensure that moisture doesn't travel across that cavity. If we remember the purposes of what a cavity essentially does in brickwork, it's to act as a stopgap for moisture, so that as bricks absorb that moisture and absorb that excess moisture into the inner side of that exterior leaf of masonry, the cavity essentially acts as a gap to prevent that moisture from getting into the internals of our building. Because I'm sure everyone knows here, particularly if you're from the East Coast and you've been getting a lot of that wet weather we've been having over the past few months, that the water on the inside of your house is generally bad news, and it's generally not something that you want. So something to think about when we're doing corbelling and when we're doing protruding bricks is to ensure that we don't neglect the rules of weatherproofing our masonry and ensure that it is still articulated properly. And look, you can sort of see here, just accentuating that point a bit further, you can see the end detail here for how they've actually achieved that. And look, this text basically summarizes what I've just said before, that the brick units do stretch into the cavity, and we need to be aware that this may act as a moisture bridge, thus it is important to have a waterproof membrane. And you can sort of see here they've stepped back their window, one course exactly from the actual corner of their core. And what that's allowed them to do is, again, if we're looking at modular design and sustainable design, it allows them to avoid having to cut bricks to achieve this look. So if you're looking to use bricks to create a textured effect, I'd highly encourage you to sort of think about how you can manipulate your brick units, or alternatively, how you can select different shapes of brick units to avoid having to cut things on site and to increase the efficiency of your build. So we're now coming to the sort of end of the webinar. I'm going to share a poll now that sort of asks you what you'd like to see in the next episode. I'd encourage you all to quickly click on that, especially if you've got this open in another tab. This is now your call to action to quickly come back and fill that in. I'd also really like to ask all of you in the chat if you've got any projects that you'd actually really like us to cover in next episodes, particularly our members. If you've joined us from one of our member manufacturer companies, now I would ask you to quickly jot down a project that's of interest to you, that's used some of your products in a really innovative manner, because Callista, myself, and the rest of the technical team, we'd absolutely love to grab a bit more information on them and showcase them to more architects and more people in future webinars. So if you're still in the chat right now, my question and my call to you is to write down one project really quickly, either in the chat, or I'm going to now share our post-webinar survey. And if you can't think of a project right now off the top of your head, please enter it in our survey, and we'll be sure to add it into our next webinar and give your products a bit of a plug. So as you're filling those out, I'm just going to sort of finish up. As you can see, with some of the products and some of the projects we've talked about today, we actually have case studies that actually showcases how the architects and engineers and builders achieved a sort of new aspect of masonry design. I'd strongly encourage you to check these out, particularly from today's chat, the home apartments case study, as this actually talks through the full process of how the engineers and architects achieve those soffits. And again, if you're looking to build a new project and you're not really quite sure where to start from a detailing perspective, or if you're not sure if there's a specific aspect of your build that you might need to quickly have a bit of a look at information on, that's where I would direct you to our technical manuals and our fact sheets. And of course, all of these are free to download. So look, that brings us now to the end of the webinar. So thank you all for tuning back in. It was really lovely to see a few familiar names in the chat, and it was really nice to see everyone tuning in. We're really hoping to push this series further over the upcoming weeks and months and release a few more episodes. So if you have any burning questions that you'd like us to answer, now would be the time to enter those in the chat. Callista and I will stay online and stay on board to have a quick chat with anyone if you have any questions. Otherwise, again, please feel free to email us at info@thinkbrick.com.au, and we're more than happy to take your inquiries and chat through them there. So one final reminder, we are very active on social media, particularly our Instagram. If you aren't following our Instagram, I don't know what you're doing. You should be. So please follow our social media, not just for information about our webinars, but also information about our Think Brick Awards and our winners for 2022. They're getting released, as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, in August. So if you want to get the scoop on that and stay up to date with any awards related news, I would strongly encourage you to go and search up Think Brick Australia on Instagram. Alrighty, so I'm going to quickly have a look back through the chat now. So Nick has suggested we look at the ABN building Leaderville. All right, Nick, perfect. That's going to be in there in the next episode. I can absolutely guarantee it. So thank you for suggesting that. And that's using the Leaderville grey, which is a one-off brick made for the client by Midland. That's awesome. And look, for anyone that's still here, if you're looking to use bricks and some of the manufacturers don't have what you're after, feel free to ask them. Their sales team, their technical team are fantastic at trying to take into account any requests. And I know we've seen in all of our Think Brick Awards in years previous, a lot of projects which have used custom bricks before. So, you know, it kind of goes back to what Callista and I were saying before, particularly at the start of the webinar. If you're looking to achieve any certain look with masonry, even if you think that product doesn't exist at the moment or can't achieve what you're looking for, it's always worth asking, because all of our manufacturers, all of our members do a great job at accounting for any requests. And James asks if there's any major changes after the release of NCC 2022 preview. That's a fantastic question, James. So for anyone that's not aware, the NCC was released the public preview earlier this month. One major change for anyone that's still joining us right now would be that bricks are defined as non-combustible, finally, in NCC Volume 1, which means that we can specify clay bricks and clay masonry without having to go through a lot of the rigorous testing procedures that we might have had to do previously. The other thing that's probably a little bit more poignant to today's webinar as well is weatherproofing of masonry and weatherproofing of single leaf masonry. If you've ever had any questions about weatherproofing masonry in the past, the NCC 2022 has now put in some new sections to actually give further guidance on how to actually achieve weatherproof masonry that was previously missing in NCC 2019. So there's lots of great changes coming to NCC, particularly for masonry. So if you're a building designer or if you're an engineer or even one of our members, I would strongly encourage you to have a quick look at it, because there's some great new sections in there that will be really beneficial for anyone designing with masonry. So yeah, are there any other questions in the chat? There we are, we're back. All right, Chris, will you be looking at projects using reinforced masonry block work? That's an absolutely excellent question, Chris, and it's something that we have been looking at. We'd love to launch a concrete masonry specific architecture webinar. I think that's something we're looking at in the near future, particularly after the release of this year's Think Brick Awards. The award winners in August, but I'd love to learn more about the Melbourne Metro Tunnel railway stations. So I actually don't know a lot about those projects at the moment, so I might have to send you a quick email after this one and grab a bit of information, because I think in these webinars we've been primarily going over clay masonry, but that's not to say I'd absolutely love to do, and our technical team would love to do a series on concrete masonry, and specifically it would be great to start with reinforced masonry blocks as well. So thanks for tuning in today, Chris, and I'm going to send you an email and I might get some of that information off you. And yeah, I think with that being said, that probably brings us to the end. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks James, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. And I'm sure we will see you all in the future at future webinars. So thanks, Nick.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty. We might just leave the event open for a couple more minutes in case anyone has some last minute questions, but thanks everyone. Thanks, Fui. It was great to have you here, Fui. Great project to go through as well. Alrighty, we're going to stop the session for the other 11 people that have decided to remain in here, but everyone have an absolutely wonderful Tuesday, and if you want a recording of this, you should be emailed a recording straight after this. So we're going to close up the session now, but have a great rest of your day. Thanks everyone. Bye.